Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Penning the Past, presented by SOHO, Save Our Heritage organization. I'm Dean Glass, and we're delighted to have you with us for today's program, exploring one of San Diego's most treasured landmarks, Balboa Park's Botanical Building. Few structures are as instantly recognizable or as beloved. Following its recent restoration, the Botanical Building once again stands as one of San Diego's most celebrated architectural and horticultural landmarks. Today's presentation will take us through its history, design, and evolution, while also examining the philosophy and challenges behind its restoration, as well as the larger story of Balboa Park's landscape, history, and the people who helped shape it. We are honored to welcome historian, writer, and landscape scholar Nancy Carroll Carter. Nancy is widely recognized as one of the leading authorities on San Diego's horticultural and landscape history. She serves as associate editor of California Garden and has written extensively about Balboa Park and influential figures such as Kate Sessions and Paul Tina. Nancy is also the creator of the newly released authoritative website kateosessions.info and is a recipient of SOHO's People and Preservation Culture Keeper Landscape Heritage Award. And now, please join me in welcoming Nancy Carroll Carter.
Well, thank you so much for joining today's discussion of Balboa Park's Botanical Building. Over many years, I've read about and written about this famous lath structure, but I've never put together a presentation on the building until invited by SOHO to participate in its Penning the Past series. So today you're seeing my first effort to bring together information and illustrations aimed at tracing the history of the Botanical Building and placing it in a historical context. Well, December 6th, 2024 was a beautiful day in Balboa Park, and the press was out in force. A number of local politicians and city officials were also on hand. The scissors were very large, and they did their job. The way was clear to enter the newly reconstructed Botanical Building. This official opening had finally come after a closure of almost exactly 3 years, a time that saw the former building taken down to its bare steel skeleton and rebuilt from the ground up. On this ribbon-cutting day, we were entering an entirely new Botanical Building. And what a thrill it was to once again be under the soaring steel arches and precisely aligned redwood laths of the building, conceived in a prior century, but once again new. The building was always about horticulture, but on this first day, the plants took a back seat to the architecture, design, and the exposed building materials. The rebuilt and reopened Botanical Building commanded a great deal of attention from local publications and from the newspapers and in television and radio news coverage. And within its first year, the project was showered with awards. Locally, both the San Diego Architectural Foundation and SOHO recognized this feat of historical preservation and adaptation. Awards also came from a professional engineering group, the American Institute of Architects, and the California Preservation Foundation. The project cost a fortune, but it exceeded expectations, winning near universal praise and demonstrating the viability of a public-private partnership cooperating in the interest of Balboa Park. In time, I believe that the successful completion of this project will be seen as a watershed in park history. But that's for the future. Today, I want to step back to explore some of the history that influenced the decision to build the original 1915 Botanical Building, as well as the decision to make this more recent, magnificent investment in Balboa Park. First, a small slice of garden history. The international exchange of plant species had been underway since the earliest voyages of discovery, but the establishment of plant nurseries and mail order seed companies after 1860 expanded public access to a huge diversity of plants. In the Victorian era, horticulture and plant societies emerged as gardening and particularly ornamental horticulture became increasingly popular. The arts and crafts movement, which spread from England to the United States, was also influential during this time period. In home planning, arts and crafts designers strove to integrate houses into their settings and to break the wall between indoor and outdoor living. Front porches, sleeping porches, and the creation of outdoor rooms in the garden to be used for leisure and entertaining were all encouraged. Lath houses were not a new concept, but with the arts and crafts movement, they got a new lease on life. They conformed to arts and crafts design preferences by using natural materials, exposing their craftsmanship, and integrating a sturdy base that anchored the open lath structure to the earth. And home gardeners were not the only ones building with lath. Across Europe, and later in the United States, large lath structures were erected in public parks, botanical buildings, and is shown here in Barcelona as part of an exposition. This is one of the oldest lath survivors, and the inside might remind you of a place you know. I've included this building because 4 of the people involved with the creation and design of San Diego's Lath House all visited Spain long before the San Diego Exposition. Unfortunately, we do not know if they went to Barcelona or if they saw this building, but my bet is that they at least knew about it. Much closer to home, we have this example of a huge wooden lath structure. It was 300 feet long, built at the Huntington Ranch, today known as the Huntington Gardens, by William Hertridge, who did all the landscape work for Henry Huntington. Mr. Huntington was just developing an interest in palms at the time of this photo, and you can see several planted in the foreground. The large central dome of the Huntington Lath House, it was 100 feet in diameter, was home to many orchids, ferns, and other shade-loving plants, but also fulfilled the arts and crafts ideal by being a place where people gathered and socialized. Henry Huntington loved entertaining his guests in this lath house. For our story, it's important to note that one of the visitors to the Huntington Lath House was a Point Loma resident with an intense interest in gardening. His name was Alfred D. Robinson. One of the true characters in San Diego history, English-born Robinson immigrated to the United States as a young man, intent on pursuing cattle ranching. Quickly disenchanted with life as a cowboy, Robinson eventually made his way to San Francisco, where he sold medical supplies. He married into high society, and in 1901, his wife became the sole heir of her family's fortune. After hearing some lectures by Madame Tingley, the Robinsons moved to San Diego and purchased 10 acres of land near the Theosophy Society's headquarters on Point Loma. In 1912, the Robinsons occupied a large home in the style of an Italian Renaissance villa designed by Emma Brooke Weaver. The estate was named Rosecroft, and Alfred Robinson happily became a gentleman horticulturalist with a sideline in civic engagement. Here is Robinson in one of his smaller lath houses. The main structure had a much higher ceiling, as shown here, but the best way to get a sense of the size of Robinson's lath house is this picture of Kate Sessions standing among the hanging begonias. The Robinsons entertained in their lath house and annually welcomed a San Diego Floral Association meeting to their Rosecroft estate. Robinson became internationally famous as a begonia breeder, and with his wife turned their interest into a business. Robinson ascribed all of his success in growing world-famous begonias to his lath house. After visiting the Huntington Ranch, he returned with an evangelical message about the perfect match between Southern California's climate and the lath house. In our region, a lath house expands the range of plants that can be grown out of doors and improves plant performance. Lath houses provide a 50% reduction in direct sun, they moderate wind flow, and provide a slight extra hold on moisture. Robinson's first writing on the subject was published in California Garden magazine, newly founded by the San Diego Floral Association. Entitled, "Get a Lath House," the article appeared in February 1910. Subsequently, Robinson published an entire series of practical and persuasive articles on the subject, making him the undisputed local authority on constructing, maintaining, and productively using a lath house. He convinced many San Diegans to build lath houses in their gardens, although we do not have many photographs of them. But here's a fanciful one in one of the Scripps homes, and this barrel-roofed lath house has been reconstructed at Marston House. When San Diego began planning an exposition, Alfred Robinson insisted that it should include a lath house. In an article that typifies his humor and idiosyncratic style, Robinson recounts awakening from a dream in which he was at the exposition enjoying a musical concert in the domed center of a gigantic lath house. His exposition dream article and subsequent advocacy won support for the idea of constructing a lath house on the exposition grounds. In addition to gardening, Robinson had broader civic interest, and his voice was an influential one in town. But local exposition planners embraced his idea because it fit into one of the overriding objectives of the exposition. That is, to showcase and promote San Diego and all of Southern California as a horticultural paradise, ready to welcome an influx of new farmers, ranchers, orchardists, commercial plant growers, and home gardeners. Well, spoiler alert, Robinson got an exposition lath house, but not the very large one he wanted. The brilliant and mercurial Bertram Goodhue was the exposition's consulting architect. We do not know much about his specific opinions on including a lath house in the design, but we do know that he planned a very strict axial layout with buildings along the long straight El Prado. Presumably, he was involved in locating the lath house as an anchor to one of the axes crossing the Prado. Goodhue made quick trips to San Diego in fulfillment of his duties, but it was Carlton Winslow, a member of Goodhue's architectural firm, who relocated to San Diego and became the on-site presence for the Goodhue firm. And it was Winslow who designed the Botanical Building. Here is Carlton Winslow through the years, with the center photograph dating to the time he was at the exposition. Winslow studied architecture in Chicago and Paris, and should be better known in our area because he spent the remaining years of his life in Southern California. In addition to his 1915 exposition, he left San Diego with the very distinctive Coulter House at 2nd and Spruce Street in Bankers Hill. And after Goodhue's death, it was Winslow who completed work on the Los Angeles Central Library. But back at the San Diego Exposition, Carlton Winslow had a lath house to design. Various ideas like this sketch were floating around in San Diego, and Alfred Robinson's latest idea was for a huge round structure with a domed center and a 500 feet and 500 feet in the diameter of the dome. 6 arms would extend from the center, each planted with a different botanical family of plants. We do not know where Winslow ultimately drew inspiration for his final design, but large botanical conservatories and past exposition architecture provided an obvious model. We only know that we got this: a symmetrical and elegant barrel vault of lath with a high central dome, all wrapped in arcaded stucco that soundly anchored the airy lath above and forged a connection with the surrounding exposition buildings. In this fusion of architectural inspiration, we also see Palladian windows. Interesting, as the architect Palladio was Italian. But these arched windows, popularized during the Renaissance, were incorporated into Spanish colonial revival architecture for their classic beauty and natural compatibility with arched arcades. Persian-style domes at the front of the building emphatically signal entry points, and the reflecting pond evokes thoughts of the Taj Mahal, reminding us that the Persian Mughal style was brought to Spain by the Moors, where it's steeped in the Mediterranean world for 700 years. Moorish design and its predecessors directly influenced Spanish colonial architecture in the New World. And in places where water is scarce, these reflecting ponds can do their important work with only a few inches of water. They provide a second way of seeing the primary building. They mirror the sky, capturing wavy images of any passing clouds. And the reflecting pond provides a cooling and calming presence. In our park, the long reflecting pond is an axial arm, extending between the heavily trafficked Prado and the serene Botanical Building, which is set far back from the main thoroughfare. The long pond invites visitors to leave the busy Prado for a quieter experience. It is designed to slow down the visitor and provide time for a mood change appropriate to the contemplative experience ahead in the soaring but wholly contained Botanical Building. A glass house extended for 150 feet behind the main structure. It was 50 feet wide, providing ample room for the rarest tropical and jungle plants that could be sourced. Glass houses, also called greenhouses, intentionally trap heat, and this one made a happy home for plants needing a steamier and warmer environment than San Diego naturally provides. A variety of aquatic plants grew in a large glasshouse tank. Well, construction on the Botanical Building began with this steel framework in 1913. The building had to be ready early enough to get plants situated inside with a bit of time to grow before the exposition opened. A 1955 San Diego newspaper reported that this framework was from an old Santa Fe train station. This assertion has become another piece of unsupported Balboa Park lore. In this very messy construction photo, the arcades have not yet been stuccoed and there's no cupola on the building. But it does appear that excavation for the lily pond may have begun. In this photo, on the far right, the building appears to be complete, but clearly there is still much work to be done out front. And finally, things are much further along here with exterior landscaping well underway. And the interior planting was nicely established by opening day. While these black and white photographs show abundant planting, the visitors in 1915 were treated to something we are missing with these pictures, and that is color and the wonder of seeing these exotic plants for the first time. All these plants were on view in the Botanical Building in 1915. While many are more familiar to us today, they were rarities at that time. And just imagine how strange a bird of paradise bloom would be if you had never seen one. Same for a tiger lily or one of those strange anthuriums or pink wax flowers that do not even look real. Staghorn ferns, the large leaf philodendron, and many other of the foliage plants here were also new to most exposition visitors. For many people, the glasshouse extension, with its mix of temperate and jungle plants, would have been a first. As I mentioned, there was a pool in the glasshouse, and we do have one color postcard of it. The exposition provided beautiful surroundings for the Botanical Building. And just as today, it is frequently photographed, in 1915, the Botanical Building was featured on various postcards. Two books were published during the second year of the exposition. One was the work of the Goodhue architectural firm, and this book confirms for us that Carlton Winslow was the Botanical Building architect, working with engineer Thomas P. Hunter, who had collaborated on the design of the Carrillo Bridge. A Berkeley University of California professor published the other book, and with his title, The Garden Fair, forever captured the exposition's emphasis on horticulture, blooming flowers, and well-designed landscape displays. Praise for the exposition's gardens, trees, and landscape was extravagant. In the popular mind, the gardens were a beloved wonderland. The beauty of the Panama-California Exposition, it was said, was a product of a magic wand. It was a paradise on earth, a new Garden of Eden. And amid the outdoors displays, the lush composition of rare and exotic plants filling the Botanical Building during the exposition made a lasting impression on visitors and expanded the understanding of San Diego's potential as a center for ornamental horticulture and commercial floriculture. In describing the exposition's horticulture, one official claimed that the world had been ransacked for specimens of the rarest plants. Another commentator recognized the immense effort behind the agriculture and horticultural displays at the exposition grounds and realized that the exposition was trying to prove a point. The message was a sentiment that many might endorse today. If the world doesn't revolve around Southern California, it ought to. Well, San Diego said a fond farewell to its exposition at the end of 1916, after its second year. The Botanical Building was always intended to be a permanent addition to Balboa Park, but questions were being raised about the fate of the other exposition buildings, all intended to be temporary, except for the California Building. But San Diego did not have much time for debate. Just months after the exposition closed, the United States entered the Great War that had been raging in Europe since 1914. A month after the United States declared war, in April 1917, the United States Navy accepted a San Diego invitation to use Balboa Park and its exposition buildings as a new Navy training center. 5 exposition buildings were quickly retrofitted for the Navy's use, and within 2 months, 1,000 Navy recruits were living in Balboa Park. Eventually, more than 3,000 seamen passed through this training station, and some of them did not know how to swim. The Botanical Building's beautiful lily pond was deepened for swim lessons. And as the only nearby body of water, the pond was also used for boat drills. The Navy occupied Balboa Park for about 2.5 years. World War I ended in November 1918. 6 months later, the Balboa Park Naval Training Station was closed. I have not yet dated this photo, but I wondered if it could go back to the post-World War I period when park staff would not have been performing regular maintenance in areas occupied by the Navy. Check out those vines, they're grapevines growing on the front of the Botanical Building. This 1925 photograph still shows the creeper vine growing on the dome, but the surrounding trees and shrubs have been trimmed. The year before, some minor, unspecified repairs were made in the building, and in 1933, steel trusses in the building were sandblasted and repainted, and some new window frames were installed, all in time for the California Pacific International Exposition held in Balboa Park in 1935 and 36. The grapevines were removed from the front of the building, and the entire area was spruced up. But the Botanical Building was not altered or repurposed for the 1935 exposition. It was just there on the grounds to be enjoyed. This exposition was also extended, finally ending in 1936. Just 5 years later, with the attack on Pearl Harbor and the American entry into World War II, the Navy quickly returned to Balboa Park, this time with many more personnel and for a stay of almost 7 years. Thousands of patients and Navy nurses were accommodated in retrofitted exposition buildings, and this time the Botanical Building lily pond was used for physical rehabilitation of injured sailors. San Diegans did not have access to the center area of the park that was occupied by the Navy. The Botanical Building was closed. This postcard, reportedly from the late 1940s, shows a very well-groomed area around the Botanical Building, while the building itself was in terrible condition and being threatened with demolition. Even back in 1944, when the Park Commission discussed changes to be made in the park after the war, a proposal to demolish the Botanical Building was on the table. This option was made more attractive by the Navy's refusal to reimburse San Diego for damage done to the building during the Navy occupation of the park. Finally, the city allocated $20,000 for repairs to the Botanical Building, but before any work was undertaken, that money was slashed from the budget. Pressure to level the building and put an end to the history of the Botanical Building increased, but by 1954, both the Chamber of Commerce and the general public began to campaign for the retention of this popular Balboa Park attraction. Finally, in 1957, the city committed to a major overhaul of the building and some significant changes from the 1915 original. In the 57-59 renovation, the extending glasshouse was removed, the stucco that wrapped all the way around the building was removed, the Palladian windows were replaced with wooden dowels, but all the lath was replaced. And here's that work underway. And here is a completed picture of the building. The wooden dowels that replaced the Palladian windows of the original building are clearly seen here. And note those 1915 eucalyptus trees still growing on each side of the entrance. Over the 1960s and early 1970s, routine repairs were undertaken and an area of the building was planted as a study garden with a printed guide to improve everyone's botanical knowledge and to encourage school groups to come into the Botanical Building. The Begonia Society honored Alfred Robinson by planting a dedicated area of the Botanical Building in his honor. In 1977, when National Historic Landmark status was conferred on a large part of the park's central mesa, the Botanical Building was within the district buildings. This 1974 postcard shows things looking sunny and bright. But note the drastically changed landscape in this later photograph. Most notably, the eucalyptus trees in front of the building are gone. Imagine how the removal of these trees changed the growing conditions within the Botanical Building. Areas that had been shaded would be getting a lot more sun. And remember, the former windows of the building had been replaced with wooden dowels, changing the air circulation throughout the building. These examples illustrate the ongoing challenges of gardening in a lath structure. Adaptive horticultural practice and plant choices change all the time, and this has been a challenge for the gardeners in this building since the beginning. By 1993, it was time for some maintenance work at the Botanical Building. A 2-month closure was announced to begin in February 1993. A very long 20 months later, the building finally reopened. There was a need for much more structural work than anticipated, and they decided to abate lead paint in the building. This very fuzzy photo shows the building covered during the paint removal. The good news is that the city did step up to meet the unexpected scope and cost of this essential work. But in less than a decade, it was time for another major investment in the Botanical Building. This planned work was billed as a complete renovation and included a replacement of the building's lath. After 9 months, a refreshed building was opened in a gala ribbon-cutting ceremony. A few years later, there was a campaign to rename the Botanical Building in honor of Alfred D. Robinson. While that failed, the Floral Association was given permission to mount a plaque in the building recognizing him as the inspiration for the idea of a lath house at the 1915 exposition. This plaque has been remounted in the new lath house. In 2004, Friends of Balboa Park, working with city staff and the City Beautiful organization, began to work toward gaining museum accreditation for the Botanical Building under the standards of the American Alliance of Museums. One requirement was to have a mission statement, and one was adopted in 2007. The Alliance provided advisory consultation and helped, and helped the San Diego team develop a plan for meeting all the membership requirements. However, after more than 5 years of work, this effort was abandoned. The Botanical Building is not an accredited museum. I don't know if the mission statement has survived. In this period of the early 2000s, the Botanical Building took on the appearance that most of us remember fondly. Here's Ranger Kim conducting a tour. There was massed greenery and densely planted beds. And by this time, some of the seasonal displays in the building were a 50-year plus tradition cherished by the community. The decade beginning in 2010 took Balboa Park and its thousands of supporters on a wild and often unhappy ride, a series of distracting events that delayed the focused attention needed by an aging Botanical Building. As 2010 kicked off, a proposal to build a bypass bridge off the historic Cabrillo Bridge and to build a parking garage that would charge for parking brought forth clashing visions of the park's future and led to warring camps and lawsuits. Then in 2012, public scorn was heaped on the participants of a midnight water gun fight in Balboa Park. The event was so successfully promoted on social media that up to 2,000 people converged on the park, where they turned into a rioting and destructive mob, causing $10,000 in damage, particularly to the Botanical Building's larger lily pond. Meanwhile, outrage and disgust were provoked when the committee formed to plan a centennial celebration of the 1915 exposition spent $3.5 million and then disbanded with absolutely no plan for 2015. Well, this tumultuous decade ended in a deadly pandemic that closed park institutions and much of the park itself. But there was some sunshine and light. Creation of the Balboa Park Conservancy in 2010 was a positive step for the future of the park. This private partner was to raise money and organize services to supplement the inadequate public investment in Balboa Park. The plan was for the Conservancy to eventually assume an unspecified degree of park management. In early 2011, the Conservancy became an official nonprofit organization. Slowly finding its feet amid waves of Balboa Park controversies, bad news, and political chaos, the Conservancy in 1913 announced a $3 million fundraising campaign for improvements to the Botanical Building. Partially due to the controversies raging around the park, fundraising was sluggish. With the hiring of its first CEO in 2015, the Conservancy undertook some important smaller projects to build its credibility and community visibility. A Balboa Park Economic Impact Survey was completed, as was the first park tree inventory in 20 years. The first segment of a Balboa Park Cultural Landscape Survey was written. And importantly for our story, initial design steps for future work on the Botanical Building were begun. But at the end of the decade, when the pandemic settled in for an indefinite stay, the largest two private park support organizations, Friends of Balboa Park and the Balboa Park Conservancy, pragmatically merged to form Forever Balboa Park in 2021. Before the pandemic and the merger, the Conservancy produced a 5-page description of its now more ambitious signature project. The Botanical Building's poor condition and its historical and cultural significance were described. Potential donors were advised that rust, termites, mildew, and dry rot were present, along with loose, damaged, and deteriorating lath and cracked plaster walls. There was no interior or exterior lighting. The restoration aimed to bring back the original 1915 splendor of this Balboa Park centerpiece. Proclaimed the largest lath house in the world, the Botanical Building displayed more than 2,100 plant varieties. It had been a consistently popular cultural destination for more than a century, as was one of the few free attractions of the park. From 500,000 to 750,000 people visited the Botanical Building annually, according to this funding appeal, making it one of the top cultural attractions in San Diego County. Now that we know the actual cost of restoring the Botanical Building, these fundraising goals seem naively modest. But in the pre-pandemic economy, when the exceedingly poor condition of the Botanical Building steel framework was not fully understood, the total project cost was set at $11 million. The fortunes of this project, off to a discouragingly slow start, got a critical boost at the end of the wild decade I described earlier. In 2020, the state of California committed $8.3 million to the restoration of the Botanical Building. When the city of San Diego officially accepted this grant, the project's continuation was assured. Several people have told me that this state grant was the most determinative factor in the ultimate success of the project. Our state senator at the time, Tony Atkins, gets full credit. The National Park Service also awarded a grant of more than $257,000 to the project. Here are some very early planning documents for the project, and obviously not the final plans. The city of San Diego and Forever Balboa Park decided to approach the restoration of the building and the surrounding gardens in two phases. The city took full responsibility for phase one, the building itself, but Forever Balboa Park was able to provide a big head start by donating 60% construction documents to the project. Phase two, renovation of the surrounding gardens and rebuilding the 1915 pergola that stood near the Botanical Building, would be paid for and the construction managed by Forever Balboa Park. In January 2022, the Botanical Building was closed. Green construction fences went up around the dismantling of the building began. Over the next 3 years, we watched the complete takedown of the building we knew, and then saw a better version of it rise again, step by careful step, until that December 6, 2024 ribbon cutting that started today's story. Here are some photographs of the process. By the time the building had reached this stage in the reconstruction, observers were feeling confident that the new iteration of our much-loved Botanical Building was going to be something very special. And we were right. Well, why did we just spend $26.5 million for a building that is 100 years old in intention and design? And why, as described in this presentation, has the Botanical Building been rescued time and again when it seemed to be down for the count and about to be bulldozed for a parking lot? I can't answer those questions, except to say that San Diegans know that the Botanical Building is a treasure and they just can't let go. There is nothing else like it, and its traditional free access has invited generations to enter and make it their own. And this, perhaps, is the magic of the Botanical Building. It is a protected and out-of-world space that allows every person to have their own experience in its green confines. Thank you so much. I'll be delighted to hear your questions and suggestions about this topic.
Thank you, Nancy. That was great. And I loved a lot of photos I'd never seen before. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat feature. I forgot to say that at the beginning, but we already have a couple. Let me check here. Why would the Navy not reimburse for the use of the buildings?
Yes, well, that's really interesting. So the deal was that the Navy would reimburse enough money to return the buildings to the condition they were in when the Navy came into the park. The Navy's argument is that they did not use the Botanical Building, and they presumably did reimburse something for the use of the pond, but the building was not part of the Navy Training Center. And even though a lot of the damage and frankly vandalism of the building occurred while the Navy was in the park, they did not use it for the training center. So it was unreimbursable.
You can stop sharing your screen if you'd like, Nancy.
Yeah, I will do that.
Is the Rosecroft Lath House open for visitors?
No, that is a private home. And in fact, I'm sad to say that that giant lath house is no longer there. There was a time that that the Rosecroft estate did a lot of different community events. They would open the estate for different nonprofit groups to use it. So there was a time when every once in a while you could go to Rosecroft and visit it, although it's, of course, just a shadow of itself. It was 10 acres. That's all been subdivided now and sold off.
All right. Where did you locate the unique and historical photos?
Well, many of them are out there in the cyber world if you search long enough. I've also been a volunteer for many, many years at the San Diego History Center, and of course have done a lot of research there. There are also photos, and I'm not sure I've used any specifically, but the San Diego Public Library has excellent photos, as does the San Diego City Clerk's archive, which is online, and those photos are available for anyone. So I'm not sure where I sourced a lot of these. The ones of the building construction, our most recent photos, I took every single one of those because I volunteer in the park, and every single Wednesday I went out and took a picture of the Botanical Building during construction.
Could you please talk about the exterior lighting of the building, both the current and new treatment, and any lighting in the past?
Well, this was one of the very interesting things about the Botanical Building. It had absolutely no lighting inside. So it had to be closed at sundown because there was no interior lighting. In 1935, they apparently did some very lovely exterior lighting of the building. But when that 1935 lighting came to the end of its natural life, it was never really replaced until very recently in the past few years when there was a lighting project in the park. But when the building was going to be reconstructed this time, very much a part of the plan was to put interior lighting into the building so that it potentially could be used for evening events. And if you, by any chance, were at December nights when the building first opened, you really got a nice opportunity to see what it was like to be in the building at night, only possible because of the newly installed interior lighting.
Excuse me. What do you think is the most understood aspect of the Botanical Building's history?
Understood or misunderstood?
Misunderstood.
Oh, okay. Well, the one that I highlighted was that it used to be a train station. That's one. I don't know. That's a very interesting question, actually. Misunderstood.
Well, that train
Well,
station.
I guess I would say one thing. I don't know that people are really aware that back in 1915, when it was first built, it really was well, it's sort of strange language to call it this, but it really was part of a propaganda campaign where we were really trying to convince people that Southern California and San Diego was the place to come because you could own 1 acre of land and totally support your family with things you were growing on that land. And the Botanical Building was just another way of showcasing the horticultural potential of San Diego. So it was more than just providing people with a place where they could walk around and see plants. It really was part of the overall objective of the 1915 exposition.
Why weren't the historical 1914 plantings installed to follow the Secretary of the Interior's treatment for historical properties?
Well, I think anyone in preservation knows the challenges of historic gardens. Historic gardens have to, it just have to be interpretations. Plants that were once available are no longer available. We've learned things about plants that we should or shouldn't grow. So historic gardens are just always very tricky in this regard. And I honestly don't know what the decision making process was in determining the way that this building would be planted. But you will not. But this is a question that you will find in every single historic garden that exists. You just cannot recreate them exactly as they were.
Um, were there any surprising discoveries made during the research or the restoration process?
Well, this is, I don't know if this was a surprise to anyone else, but I was surprised by the color of the building that we ended up with. They did do extensive research to determine the original paint color of the stucco on the 1915 building. And I'm sure you've noticed that it has a bit of a pink cast to it, and it is definitely different from the paint that's on the other reconstructed exposition buildings in the park. So to me, the color of the stucco was probably the biggest surprise. I loved they found the Sherwood green, which they were able to document that as the color of the windows and so on.
What were some of the biggest challenges faced during the restoration project?
From what I've heard, the biggest challenges was how um, was what poor shape the steel was in. So they knew they were going to have to do a lot of restoration of the steel framework, but it turned out that it was so much more damaged and weakened than anticipated. That was the biggest cost difference in the bid and what eventually had to be paid. And in fact, I just read the other day that there were 1,300 separate individual repairs made to the steel in the building.
Oh. How does the Botanical Building compare with other Exposition era conservatories and botanical structures elsewhere in the United States?
Well, I don't know that I'm really qualified to answer that because I haven't done that full study, but I believe ours is the largest and the oldest iteration of a lath structure any place in the United States and further beyond.
If funding and logistics were no obstacle, is there anything else you would like to see restored or interpreted at the Botanical Building? Maybe that
Oh, that
glass
is really interesting.
greenhouse.
You know, I have to say, I I don't know what that would be because I do think this restoration was as careful and as historically accurate as anything we might have expected. I really think they did a fantastic job in bringing this building back. And of course, it does have some changes from the 1915 building, but they're really sensitively done and they do enhance the building. So I'm not an expert. There may be others who know more about the engineering of the building or other aspects, but I think this was a restoration that we can all just be extremely proud of.
After spending so much time studying and writing about Balboa Park's landscape history, what do you hope visitors notice or appreciate differently the next time they walk past the Botanical Building?
Hmm. Well, I hope they notice the care that is now being given to this part of the park. From 1915, the Botanical Building was supposed to remain in the park and it was supposed to be surrounded by these lovely gardens. And, the Botanical Building has been surrounded by gardens, but I don't think we would call them as I don't think we would call them lovely gardens. So I think the idea that the Botanical Building was restored as a part of this two-phase project, and we're now seeing the completion of the second phase and seeing what those gardens can really look like. I have to admit, I didn't have a view of what difference it was going to make when the gardens were restored. But I would just ask people to look around, go sit in the new pergola and get a whole new perspective on that area of the park. Notice that instead of two benches on each side of the botanical buildings, lily ponds, there are lines of benches inviting people to sit. So I just think that the whole picture with the completion of phase two is worthy of a careful study.
Somebody, you mentioned this already about the glass house. That was on the north side of the building?
Yeah, it just stuck out from the back. So it was long. It was a huge glass house. And there was some interest on part of the director of Balboa Park or San Diego Park System at that time, John Morley, was kind of interested in really making something of that. But of course, he was long gone by the time the 1950 renovation occurred and when they finally took it out.
All right. Is there a plan to keep the building from deteriorating in the future? So quickly,
Well,
I mean.
it's wood. It's going to deteriorate. And I mean, I do think that's one of the things about a building like this. You just know that you're going to have to do this again in a matter of years. There is no way you're going to put redwood lath out in the sun and have it last forever. I think that but some of the changes that have been made that will help the building last a little bit longer is the way that irrigation is done in the building. Previously, part of the problem with the steel stresses and a lot of the lath along the sides is that the watering always got them wet, and that aided in their deterioration. But I think that things have been powder coated, and the lath house is high quality, properly sourced redwood. I think they've done what they can to make the building last as long as possible, but it's wood. It's going to deteriorate over time.
All right. Looks like, speaking of time, we're just about out of time. Oops, hang on just a moment. All right. Thank you so much, Nancy, for the fascinating presentation and for sharing your knowledge and insight into the remarkable history of the Botanical Building and its restoration. It's always inspiring to better understand the history, design, and stewardship behind the places we know and love. With the Botanical Building once again welcoming visitors, there has never been a better time to visit it and explore its remarkable history. Thank you to everyone who joined us today for Penning the Past. Whether you attended live or are watching later on YouTube, we're glad you could be a part of the program. And be sure to join us next month when historian Alex Bevel presents Claremont, the Village Within a City. If you enjoyed today's webinar, we encourage you to learn more about the work of Save Our Heritage organization by visiting sohosandiego.org, where you can find information about upcoming events, tours, lectures, advocacy efforts, and membership opportunities. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel somewhere down there so you don't miss future Penning the Past programs and other presentations from SOHO. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much, Nancy. We appreciate having you.
Thank you.